Hello, fictional. Welcome to the Fiction Series X. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei was the quiet prince of Kuoh Academy and got harem? If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Kuoh Academy. A prestigious private school that recently opened its doors to the male populace. There was still a lot of catching up to do, since the women outnumbered the men 5 to 1. Why does this matter? Enter Issei. Currently in his second year. Known as the quiet prince of Kuoh due to him shying away from most other students. This unfortunately brought even more attention to him due to many girls finding him even cuter than he already was. Of course, there were a few exceptions. A pattern that appeared was that Issei seemed to open up to the student council members, which led many students to try and get in. But out of all the members, he was almost always seen playing with Sona, the president herself. They would be found playing chess in near silence throughout the school. For Issei, life was relatively calm until he heard 6 words that would change his life. Will you go out with me? Issei was shocked was an understatement. Here he was, with a very attractive girl his age, and she just asked him out. But how do you know me? This new girl sprang up, with her very nervously explaining. Oh, on my way home, I see you a lot here. I always thought you were cute. She turned away at that last comment before turning back to him, and she asked again. So will you go out with me? Issei processed the words carefully before he made up his mind. Yes. I will. He saw the girl jump in joy and she rushed up to him and hugged him tightly. Thank you. My name is Amano. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Issei-kun. Nuo. Issei-kun has been taken. That was the cry heard from many girls around Kuoh Academy. Issei walked throughout the school grounds hand in hand with his new girlfriend with the biggest smile on his face. The past weekend had been amazing and the day back was great. Issei, you bastard. At that cry, Issei quickly brought Amano and himself down to see 2 people fly over him. He heard them groan before getting up and yelling again. What happened to getting our girlfriends together? Issei sighed. Itsuda, Motohama. What? Shut up. With that, he turned to his girlfriend. Hey Amano, how would you like to go out together on Sunday? As our first date. He saw her quickly nod her head. I'd love to. They turned to leave before they were stopped by a certain president. Issei. He turned to see Sona with a calculating look on her face. Hey Sona. This is my girlfriend, Amano. On the outside, Sona appeared happy for her friend, but on the inside, she was confused. Fallen angel. What do they want with Issei? Then she felt the aura around him. His eyes widened very slightly, only noticeable if you were really looking. This power. Why haven't I felt it before? Sona quickly excused herself before retiring to her desk in the student council clubroom. There she thought for a long time. So Issei has something very powerful. The smile grew on her face and she quietly exhaled and pushed her glasses up. Looks like I've found my new pawn. Sunday couldn't come any quicker for Issei. He stood quietly in the plaza where they were going to meet. He looked down at his watch before he frowned. She isn't here. Did she change her mind? Issei. His head snapped up and he smiled at the sight of Amano running towards him. She jumped towards him and he caught her in a hug. Sorry I was late. I had some business at home I had to deal with. He shook his head. No need to apologize. Shall we get our date started? She giggled. Yes. Issei was nervous. His date was ending and he wasn't sure if he did a good enough job at it. He caught Yuma's sad look whenever she thought he wasn't looking and he was worried that he had done something wrong. They had decided to end the date at the fountain near the center of the park. They both sat at the edge of the fountain. So did you have fun? Yuma nodded and smiled. You did a really good job. Then she mumbled quietly. It's too bad we won't go on another one. At those words, Issei's eyes widened and he felt a sharp pain come from his stomach. He looked down to see a spear of light in his stomach. He fell to his knees and he looked up to see Yuma have black wings erupt from her back. She seemed to be crying. I didn't want to do this, but I have my orders. She quietly flew away and Issei closed his eyes. He was hurt, confused, and scared. Even though Yuma had stabbed him, he felt the need to forgive her. He saw his own blood pool around him and he slowly drifted from consciousness. Sorry Sona. Looks like we'll never play together again. But that final thought, his vision went black and he knew no more. He was floating in a sea of flames. So you're gonna be my partner, eh? His eyes were closed. Who are you? His eyes slowly opened and he witnessed the huge crimson dragon in front of him smirk. I'm Drake, the Red Dragon Emperor, and I'm gonna be your partner from now on. He saw him fly towards him and his vision went white. His eyes snapped open and he flew up from the bed he was on. He gasped for air and he looked around. He was in his room at home. But I died. He looked around. Everything seemed normal. Must have been a really vivid dream. He walked downstairs and saw his parents sitting quietly at the table. Morning. Their heads snapped up to see Issei standing there. They rushed up and pulled him into a hug. Issei. You're awake. He nodded slowly. Yeah, why wouldn't I be? His parents turned to each other. You've been asleep for the past 3 days, that's why. Issei's eyes widened. What? So I guess that really was a dream. Issei was currently walking to school. He was feeling strange. As if something had changed. It's because things have changed. He jumped and started whipping his head around. There was no one around. I'm in your head, partner. He calmed down. Looks like it wasn't a dream. It sure as hell wasn't. So you're stuck in my head, eh? Well, that and the sacred gear in your arm. What the hell is a sacred gear? He heard a sigh emanate from Dreg. You've got a lot to learn, partner. Issei's back. He was quickly rushed by the school populace. Are you okay? What happened? Why didn't you stay away? Issei opted to ignore that last comment. Probably Mitsuda and Motohama, the jealous bastards. Issei. He looked up and saw Sona. Hey Sona. What's up? She just stared at him. Follow me. He gulped. She hasn't given me a short answer like that since we first met. They walked into an empty classroom before she locked the door. So Issei. Yes. How did dying feel? His eyes widened. He staggered back. How do you know about that? She smiled and immediately, Issei was tense. Well, if it weren't for me, you'd still be dead. His mind went blank. Sona just laughed. I've got a lot of explaining to do. Cold. That's what he felt. The only thing he could feel was the rain hitting his skin. You can't run forever. He panted heavily, his legs burning. Gotta get back home. Mom and Dad will never forgive me if I don't make it. Partner, look out. The flash appeared, his vision went white and he knew no more. He shot up, a scream dying in his throat. What the hell was that? He looked around before flopping back down onto his bed. What did I do to deserve this? Flashback. So let me get this straight. You brought me back to life. Sona nodded. Would you laugh earlier? You seemed a bit too happy on the fact that I died. Her eyes widened. I didn't mean for it to sound like I was happy, but your face was too much for me to handle. She leaned forward. We've known each other for, what, 2 years now? Yeah, why? I was furious when I found your body. I wanted nothing more than to hunt down the fallen angel who killed you. It was Issei's turn to widen his eyes. But then I realized something. She looked into his eyes. I still had the power to save you. It took a lot of evil pieces to get you. All of my pawns, to be exact. His mind raced to the information she had given him earlier. You and I have played chess enough times to know what type of piece the pawn is. He nodded. The foot soldier, the weakest of the bunch. But they can also be the winning piece. He nodded at that. I don't regret using those pieces on you. I know for a fact that you have a lot to prove. She got up to leave, but Issei heard her whisper. I think you've got something to prove to yourself as well. He sat quietly for a while before standing up. He had a lot of work to do. Flashback end. He looked at the clock on his desk. 5:27 a.m. He shook his head. There was no way he was going back to sleep after that. He thought to himself for a little while before getting up. Sona no, Sona is probably at school already doing work. He smiled to himself. It has been a while since our last game. Sona Shitori, or as she's known in the underworld, Sona Sitri, sat quietly at her desk. She had finished all her work the day previous and so she sat quietly, waiting for the school day to begin. She thought quietly about her newest addition to her peerage. Did I really sound like I was happy? I can't have Issei thinking that. She pondered for a little while before the sound of the door opening made her look up. There he was. The topic of her thoughts. She looked surprised before smiling. She could afford to show her emotions around him. Issei, what are you doing here? He scratched the back of his head. Couldn't sleep. With everything that's happened lately. She looked down. Did he want to leave? She couldn't afford that. She'd lose him and that couldn't happen at all. Plus. She looked back up to see him setting up a chessboard. He smiled at her. It has been a while since we played. She grinned and got up from her desk. She sat opposite from Issei and so began their game. Hey Averio. SHHHHH. Ria's Gremory blinked. There sat her best friend and the quiet prince of Kuoh, playing chess. They've been at it for an hour. They're nearing the end. Ria's was shocked. Not even she had come close to beating Sona. She quickly grabbed a chair and sat down. It was quiet throughout the room. Issei was pondering his next room and Sona sat quietly, a calculating look on his face. Check. The gasp came from everyone in the room. Was this it for Sona? She adjusted her glasses, sighed, and smiled. Looks like you've beaten me. Issei exhaled and grinned. So that's what, one for me, countless more for you. She let out a laugh at that, a sound foreign to many members. You beat me, nonetheless. She got up and turned to Riaz. What is it that you need, Riaz? Riaz shook her head, momentarily forgetting why she had come. She gathered her thoughts before speaking. I need some help. Is it with that thing? Riaz nodded. Issei sat quietly and the other members had other conversations. I'll try to figure something out. Worse comes to worse, we'll have to find another person. Riaz sighed sadly before getting up. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. Issei frowned at that. He got up and put his hand on Sona's shoulder. If you need any help, just let me know, alright? Sona seemed surprised before nodding. I just might need that, thanks. He nodded towards Riaz and walked out, heading to class. Riaz stepped forward and smirked at Sona. He beat you, huh? You know what that means. Sona smiled before looking at Riaz. I couldn't be happier with how this turned out. She looked towards the floor and Riaz thought she saw her blush. Now all I need to do is tell him about it. It was nearing night and the sun set on another day. Issei quietly listened to music as he walked home and he was unaware of his surroundings. He noticed he could see well even though it was dark and he felt more energized. Must be the devil aspect. Then it hit him. The aura of danger. He tensed up and quickly jumped forward. He turned to see a light spear hit the ground where he was just moments ago. DCH. I can't believe I missed. He looked upwards to see another fallen angel. He wore a trench coat and a black fedora. Seriously, what is up with you guys and the whole kill me thing? The fallen angel laughed. Can't tell you that kid, it'd ruin the surprise. Issei narrowed his eyes. Fine then. Partner, let me handle this. You sure? How do I use you to fight him? Say boosted gear and I'll handle the rest. Boosted gear. The crimson-red gauntlet appeared on his arm and the fallen angel's eyes widened. What the hell? Boost. Issei felt his power increase and he ran towards the fallen angel. You think I'd just sit here and let you kill me? Wrong. He jumped up and he managed to hit the fallen angel, who was too shocked to move. The hit sent him flying into a nearby tree. Issei saw a shine behind him and he spun around. He saw Sona and the rest of the peerage step out. At the angel. The fallen angel just shook his head and started to fly off. My name is Donashik and I hope we never meet again. He smirked and snapped his fingers. Issei felt a horrible pain and looked down. A light spear was embedded in his chest. He wobbled, his vision leaving him, and the last thing he heard before he lost consciousness was Sona calling out his name. His eyes slowly opened. It was dark and it looked like he was in a medical wing of some sort. He heard the slow beep of a heart monitor. He turned his head to see Sona and Tsubaki quietly conversing about something. He flopped his head on his pillow and the sound alerted the two that he was awake. Sona reached his side first and held his hand softly. Are you alright? You've been out for a few hours. Issei looked down and noticed that the hole in his stomach was gone. Thank goodness for the powers of the supernatural. Yeah, I'm fine. Mostly just tired. Sona let out a sigh of relief. She brushed her hair out of the way and with the moonlight filtering through the window and it shining on her, Issei's heart fluttered. What the hell? She's my best friend. He quickly shook his head and snapped out of his stupor. He tried to get up but as he got up, his chest started to hurt badly. Sona placed her hand on his chest and slowly pushed him back down onto the bed. You need rest, alright. You're still injured. I'll wake you up in the morning. Oh okay. Where did that stutter come from? Tsubaki walked out and Sona followed her. She started to close the door to the room and before it closed, she flashed him a smile. Issei lied down and closed his eye, thinking about the new feelings he had for his best friend and falling asleep. The sun would rise in a few hours and he wouldn't wake for a few hours after. Issei shot up. He was drenched in sweat, panting heavily. What the hell was that? Partner? What's wrong? I've been having weird dreams lately. Of fights. Your voice is always there. I'll see what I can do about them. Issei sighed and laid back down on the bed. He slowly calmed himself down before he heard the door creak open. He looked up and smiled. Hey Sona. Sunlight filtered in behind her, silhouetting her. She looked up at him and smiled. Morning Issei. How are you feeling? Issei thought quietly, almost telling her about his dream, but then he looked at Sona. She had bags underneath her eyes and her normally perfect hair was frazzled. Her glasses hung lazily on the bridge of her nose, almost falling off. I'm feeling tired, but better. You alright? You seem like you haven't slept in days. Sona moved forward and grabbed a chair. She brought it next to his bed and sat down in it. You always were an observant one. She fixed her glasses and leaned forward. Her voice was a whisper, almost embarrassed to admit the reason. I look like I haven't slept in days because I literally haven't slept. Issei's eyes widened. He got up from his bed and picked Sona up, bridal style. Sona waved her hands before wrapping them around his neck. Issei. What are you doing? He placed her on the bed and Sona felt disappointment flutter through her brain. He sat down in the chair she previously occupied. You are getting some rest. Now tell me, why is it that you haven't slept? She moved to get up but she noticed the look Issei gave her and laid right back down. She blushed. I'm his master. I shouldn't need to listen to him. She sighed and made herself comfortable. Ria's problem has been making her more and more worried. She's been less focused and it's worrying me. Issei straightened his back. What's the problem? I could help if needed. Sona stayed silent for a little while before speaking again. Ria's is engaged and she wants out. Issei was shocked. She's supposed to marry the heir to a pureblood devil family, Riser Phoenix. Her father arranged the entire marriage. She doesn't want to marry him and for good reason as well. He treats his servants like toys and she knows all she's going to become is just a trophy wife. Sona looked up at Issei and the look on his face shocked her. Issei was furious. How dare they? They take away her choice, her freedom, and they want to hand her over to this asshole. Issei's anger nearly reached the breaking point before he felt Sona's hand on his shoulder. He looked up and saw the look of worry on her face. He let out a breath before looking Sona in the eyes. What can I do? There must be something. Sona smiled sadly. There is one thing but I don't think it'll work. Issei held her hands in his and looked deep into her eyes. We'll make it work. Now tell me. Sona couldn't tear her eyes away from his. The amount of worry and care in his eyes almost made her tear up. We challenge him to a rating game. The reason why I don't think we'll win is because he hasn't actually lost a game. He's forfeited for family, but he's never lost an actual game. Issei looked down. What Sona didn't know was that he was having a conversation with Drake. Partner, I know who this man is. It's not gonna be easy and you're gonna have to work real hard for it, but I can help. I'll do it. Anything to get this stress off of Sona. Well, looks like we'll have to change that. Issei smiles before yawning. He hears Sona yawn and he lays his head on the bed. He looks up at Sona and she shakes her head. There's room for you here. His mind too tired to think, he got up and laid down on the bed next to Sona. She moved her head and laid it down on his shoulder. He sighed quietly. If only things were different. He closed his eyes, falling asleep. Little did he know, Sona was thinking the same thing. Mitsuda and Motohama were walking towards the medical wing. The reason? The kendo team. I can't believe you got us caught. Me, you were the one giggling and drooling. Shut the hell up. You were the one who decided to slam a hand on the wall. The two argued back and forth before Mitsuda opened the door. They both froze at the sight. Issei Haidu and Sana Shitori. Asleep together. Cuddling. They looked at each other before running out of the room. People had to know. The prince has been taken. More girls for US. Asia Argento stood in front of the abandoned church. This is where she was supposed to be. She nervously knocked on the door and the door opened. Ah, you're the nun we've been expecting. Asia, correct? She nodded nervously. There's no need to be nervous. I won't bite. My name is Rainer and I'll be your caretaker during your time here. Well, this certainly could have gone better. Issei and Sona were currently being overrun by students asking if the two were dating. Sona had a light blush on her face and Issei face palmed. Alright, who said that we were cuddling? He spotted Mitsuda and Motohama trying to sneak out of the lunchroom and just before they made it out, Issei had grabbed their collars and dragged them back inside. The two sputtered out excuses, blaming each other. Issei, I swear it wasn't me. Mitsuda said we had to. Issei, don't listen to his lie. It's his fault. Issei just sighed. He glared at the two and turned over to Sona. Well Sona, as the student council president, you have full say as to what happens to these two. What are they gonna get? He smirked and discreetly pointed towards the watching kendo team. Sona saw and her mouth twitched. I do believe the kendo team needs some volunteers for their members to train against. Mitsuda and Motohama froze and dropped to their knees. Please Prez, don't make us do this. We'll do anything else. Sona just smirked and with her arm looped around Issei's, left the room. The perverted duo turned around to see the kendo team smirk evilly. They screamed and ran, the team right behind them. They didn't make it far. Issei and Sona walked into the clubroom together, the many members looking up. Tsubaki flashed a smile at Issei and Sona sat down at her desk. I have an announcement to make. All the conversations in the room stopped and they all focused on Sona. As many of you may know, Riaz is stuck in an unwanted engagement. I've got a plan to get her out of it. Everyone leaned in, listening. Now, this won't be easy, and the repercussions could be dangerous, so if anyone wants out, I suggest you tell me now. When everyone stayed silent, Sona smiled proudly. We're going to challenge Riser Phoenix to a rating game. Silence was not what Sona was expecting. Anger, confusion, refusal, she expected. But not silence. Then, almost as one, they nodded. Sona smiled. Then let's start training. Hi. Issei was currently miles away from the others, alone on his own training regime. With a bunch of makeshift targets, he practiced his punches and strikes. Boost. He smashed through a target before rushing the remaining two. Scattered around the huge area, piles of wood littered the ground. Good job, partner, that's a new record. Issei shook his head. Not fast enough. It's not fast enough. It's not fast enough. His anger and frustration grew and soon enough, his vision went red. Partner. Partner. Stop. Issei's vision slowly came back, and when he finally calmed down, he was shocked to see the area around him completely scorched. What the hell? He looked at the gauntlet covering his hand. Greg, what the hell was that? It seems that when you get angry, you gain this power. It's like a bloodlust. Issei stood quietly, thinking about his new power. Looks like I have another thing to fix. His face hardened, and he moved deeper into the forest. Issei laid quietly on a tree branch, looking up at the stars. He sat quietly, thinking about the past 2 years knowing Sona. He blushed as he thought about his master. Something wrong, partner? Issei sighed before shaking his head. Just a lot of things. Some about the battle that's coming, but there's one really important one, at least it's important to me. You can tell me, partner. Issei sighed and leaned back into the tree. Do you think Sona likes me? Greg laughed, but not mockingly. He sighed before replying. Partner, of all the things. Greg was silent for a little while before he spoke again. You two are certainly close. But partner, I don't think you have to worry about her feelings for you. They're certainly there. Issei smiled and closed his eyes. You're a good friend, Dreg. Issei had no way of knowing, but if Dreg still had his dragon form, Issei would have seen him smile. You are too, partner. Sona's peerage trained in tandem with Issei. It was late at night, and the only two awake at their camp were Sona and Tsubaki. She handed a cup of tea to Sona, and Sona sat quietly. Tsubaki sat next to her. Do you think we'll win? The rest of us believe we will, but what about you? Sona nodded. I'm worried about it, but I have confidence that we'll make it through. Tsubaki nodded and quietly sipped her tea. She almost stood up, but then Sona spoke again. The match isn't the only reason why I'm worried. Tsubaki tilted her head in confusion. What's the other reason? To this day, Tsubaki would swear that she saw Sona blush, and for good reason as well. I still have to tell him we're engaged. Tsubaki almost laughed, but a grin slipped out. I'm sure he wouldn't mind being married to his best friend. Plus, from what I heard about what happened in the medical room. Sona's head shot up and she shook her head. That's not what it looked like. Sona blushed heavily and looked back down. Tsubaki laughed. Before she had met Issei, Sona was the cold calculating type. Sure, she still was in a sense, but she was a lot more open and emotional with her peerage. Sona sat quietly, calming herself down. She looked up at the sky above, knowing that he was looking at the same stars as she was. Do you think he does like me? Tsubaki sobered up. She had never seen her master act like a normal teenager before. Through all her years in the peerage, Sona had always been a leader first. Her acting like her age for once was certainly serious. Tsubaki smiled in response. Without a doubt in my mind. Dragon shot. A beam of energy flew out of the gauntlet, flying towards the trees, disintegrating anything that got in its path. Issei panted and kneeled. Well, at least it isn't the size of a truck anymore. Partner, it's almost time. You've trained enough. Do you think it'll be enough to beat him? You'll have to work hard to beat him. Is there anything I can do to improve my chances? Greg was silent before replying. There is one thing, but are you willing to sacrifice something? Anything. Anything for Sona. Very well. Issei walked into the occult research clubroom and saw the multitude of people there. There was Sona and the student council, Rias and the occult research club, and Riser. The man himself sat beepily, smirking and looking at Rias. She rolled her eyes and looked at a woman in a maid uniform. Grafia, is there no other way? Sona stepped forward. There's one way. Rias looked desperately at Sona. What? What is it? Sona's eyes hardened and she looked at Riser. Riser Phoenix, I challenge you to a rating game. Riser stood up and looked at Sona. Do you think you can defeat the mighty Riser Phoenix? With your incomplete peerage? He laughed mockingly and Issei had to clench his fist to keep calm. If we win, then you don't marry Rias. And if Riser wins? Sona exhaled and spoke. You get me? Issei's eyes widened and he grabbed her arm. Sona, what the hell? This wasn't part of the plan. She smiled sadly and she whispered into his ear. It's the only way he'd accept. Sona saw the pain and worry in his eyes and when Issei's hand rose to her cheek, she leaned into it. Issei heard Riser's laugh behind him before he heard his arrogant voice. You'll be good in my collection. Sona fixed her glasses and looked to Graphia. Whenever you're ready. Graphia nodded before the two groups were teleported. Into the student council club room. This is Graphia. Due to Sona Citri issuing the challenge, it has been decided that this rating game will take place in the human school she attends, with the student council club room being Sona's base and the occult research clubhouse as Riser's. The match will begin in 10 minutes. The various club members moved to various locations, covering different locations within the school grounds. Sona and Issei sat alone in the club room, with Issei's back turned to Sona. Sona walked towards him and slowly turned him towards her. Why? That one word nearly broke her. Issei didn't seem to notice. You do realize what'll happen if we lose, right? 2 years Sona, 2 years. I've never seen you make a stupid decision in those 2 years and the first one you make is pretty much the worst one. Why? Issei heard Sona sniffle and turned. His eyes widened when he saw the tears building up in her eyes. He embraced her and he felt her arms wrap around him. She buried her head into his chest and he regretted his harsh words. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Sona repeated it like a mantra and Issei rubbed her back in comfort. He sat the both of them down onto a couch and Issei held her cheeks in his hands. I'm the one who should be saying that. He looked into her eyes and saw the worry in them. He leaned forward and pushed his head against hers. He closed his eyes. I promise you, we'll win this. We'll beat the egotistical fried chicken and free Rias. Sona closed her eyes and nodded in response. Issei, I need to tell you something. Issei moved away, trying not to focus too much on how pretty she looked. Yeah, what is it? Sona took a deep breath and began to speak. Issei, I think. The game starts in 30 seconds. Get prepared. Issei smiled sadly before standing up. Tell me afterwards, okay? We've got a fight to win. He smiled at her and she smiled back. She lost her courage and could only nod. Good luck out there Issei. Stay safe. Issei sent a lopsided grin at her and it made her heart stop. I promise. Tsubaki stood inside the gym, waiting to see her enemies. She stood alone, with the other members scattered at strategic locations around the school ground. She meditated quietly, knowing that Riser's peerage would push for an attack first. She heard one of the doors open and she rose an eyebrow at the noise. No member of Riser's peerage would just simply walk in. Who? She opened her eyes and saw Issei wave as he walked over. The queen smiled and Issei sat next to her. They were quiet before Tsubaki spoke. How's Sona? I heard the beginning of your rant and I can't say I don't agree with you. Issei cringed slightly and Tsubaki rubbed his back in comfort. I regret a lot of it. That was the weakest I've seen her. Tsubaki turned his face towards her. His brown eyes stared into hers. She doesn't blame you for it and neither do I. I'd rant at her as well if it weren't for the fact that I knew that she'd only listen to you. Issei smiled softly and he leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. You love her, don't you? His breath caught in his throat. Then he sighed and smiled. I think I do. Boom. The wall across from them was blasted open. Together, they watched 5 women walk inside. Tsubaki fixed her glasses, remembering their roles. His knights and his rooks and a bishop. They must really want the gym. Issei turned and smirked at Tsubaki. I'll take the rooks, you take the knights, and we get the bishop together. Tsubaki grinned and nodded. Isabelle and Shulin watched as the lone pawn walked towards them. They smiled beepily, believing this to be an easy fight. The pawn, Issei was his name, spoke up. I have no grudge against you two. I really just want to kick the shit out of your master, do you mind if you could just off yourself? The two looked at each other incredulously. He really didn't think that he could beat Riser, did he? They heard a sigh and Issei spoke. Can't say I didn't warn you. The crimson gauntlet appeared on his left arm and with speed that could have him mistaken as a knight, he rushed towards the two. Boost. Isabella took a fist to the gut and blood flew out of her mouth. He swept his leg under her and she fell to the floor. He brought his leg up but before he could bring it down on the winded rook, Shulin tackled him. They rolled and Issei untangled himself from her. He immediately brought his gauntlet up, blocking her right hook. He grabbed her hand and Shulin froze at the sight of his eyes. She felt cold at his gaze. She felt powerless, weak and she nearly collapsed at the sight. His eyes stayed hard but his smile made her feel calm. I hope you two have a speedy recovery. She almost nodded at that. Boost. She felt her body get spun around and she felt herself get thrown. Her body impacted with Isabella and they both flew into the wall. Uruk's riser eliminated. Issei panted, wiping sweat off his brow. He heard an explosion behind him and saw an armored body fly past him. It rolled before laying still and being surrounded by a light. One knight riser eliminated. He turned to see Tsubaki smirk almost evilly at the remaining knight and bishop. The bishop was trying her best to heal the knight, but then Tsubaki rushed the two with her naginata. The two stood no chance and they fell to the ground. One knight, bishop, riser, eliminated. Issei almost pouted. What happened to take out the bishop together? Tsubaki blushed slightly before fixing her glasses. Got carried away, sorry. Boom. 2 knights, 2 rooks, 1 bishop, Sona, 8 pawns, riser eliminated. The pair's eyes widened at that. That must have been Ubeluna, riser's queen. Issei nodded. They must be desperate if they took out their teammates as well. Issei suddenly felt a chill rush up his back. He grabbed Tsubaki and ran out of the gym. Just as they cleared the gym walls, it erupted in a massive explosion. The two were knocked forward by the shockwave. Issei coughed and slowly pushed himself up. Huck and bomb queen. The laugh echoed throughout the area and Issei looked up. A very regal-looking lady was in the air, a hand to her mouth. A lazy smile was plastered on her face as she looked down on Issei. Her other hand was covered in flames and she raised it. She spoke to Issei and nodded her head towards the roof of the school building. He looked up and saw a battle of fire and water. He heard Ubeluna speak. She won't last much longer. Riser will enjoy playing with her. His vision went red and he glared at the bomb queen. A chill went up her spine at the glare, but she smirked and raised her hand, a fireball forming. Too bad you won't be around to see it. At those words, the fireball shot out and Issei prepared for the heat. Miralis. Both Ubeluna and Issei reacted to that and the bomb queen saw a mirror appear and her fireball begin to fly towards her at an incredible pace. She tried to dodge, only for the fireball to explode spectacularly. Queen, riser, eliminated. Issei turned to see Tsubaki, barely standing on her feet. She smiled weakly. Go after her. She began to fall forward, only for Issei to catch her. Her eyes were barely open and he saw her fade away. Queen, Sona, eliminated. He heard an explosion in the distance and he slowly got up and started to move as fast as possible to the school roof. He panted as he burst through the door. His muscles strained, his lungs burning. He looked to see Sona at Riser's knees, his hand roughly grabbing her chin. Sona tried to turn her head, but Riser pulled on her head. Riser smirked at Issei and saw the anger in his eyes. Too late, weakling. Your precious king is at my mercy. Issei moved forward, expecting him to raise his hand to shoot a fireball. Instead, he lifted his other hand and it erupted in flames. He brought it close to Sona and Issei's heart stopped. She isn't good enough. With that, Riser brought his flaming hand onto Sona and she screamed. Issei screamed and his vision went red. Then, nothing. Sona had failed. She was at Riser's complete mercy. Issei stood a few feet away, hands clenched. She felt the heat from his burning hand, but she would not quit. She would not. Then she felt the flames on her and she screamed. Too suddenly, the pain lessened and she fell to the ground. She looked to see Issei on top of Riser, crimson flames pouring out of his body. She witnessed the gauntlet transform and she heard it shout out. Balance breaker. Riser kicked Issei off and to his shock, the crimson flames hurt. They burned and burned like a heat he had never felt in his life. He had no time to react, however, as the armored covered figure charged at him again. Boost X10. The fist connected with Riser's face and he was knocked into the ground. The crimson flames licked at his skin, his regenerative powers useless against the fire. He felt his skin burn and char and Riser panicked. Riser surrenders. The figure, Issei, slowed and then continued forward. He didn't stop. Riser tried to fly away, but his ankle was grabbed and he was slammed into the roof. He tried crawling away, only to feel a clawed hand rip into his back. He screamed in pain and he felt himself get chucked aside. He rolled down the roof, stopping right at the edge. He looked up to see Issei and he froze. Issei moved to finish him off, only for Sona to hug him from behind and pull him back. Issei. That's enough. It's over. Please. Issei stopped moving and stood stock still. Then, Drake spoke. Riser Phoenix, you have no idea how easy it would be to kill you. Both Sona and Riser froze at the voice. Drake continued. I will not finish you off for 2 reasons. 1, because Sona here has asked to stop. The other reason, well, it'd be easier to show you. The armor slowly faded away and Sona nearly screamed. Blood poured out of Issei's mouth and his eyes were hollow. Sona grabbed him and she felt his body drop. He's been out since he tackled Riser. His body wouldn't stop, so I decided to step in. Sona teared up and smiled sadly at her pawn. She stroked her face and the two started to teleport away. She felt the comfort of a hospital bed beneath her and she looked over and saw Issei. He was rushed away into another room and while Sona knew he'd be alright, she felt worry encompass her entire being. She felt her heartache and with that, she made her decision. She loved Issei Haidu and she was going to tell him that she loved him as soon as he awoke. Issei's eyes slowly fluttered open. He ached in the usual places and in places he didn't even know could ached. He found himself in a hospital room and he cringed. He'd been in the hospital too many times. His latest dream didn't help his mood either. Who the hell is Asia? She must have been important, I remember that name as well. Issei thought about it a little while longer before he heard the door open. He looked up and saw Sona walk in with a plate of food. She looked up and she dropped the tray. Her mouth opened and her eyes widened. Hi. Issei. She rushed towards him and jumped on top of him. He grunted and felt her arms fly around his neck as she hugged him tightly. He hugged her back and he could feel her tears staining his clothes. It's been days since the fight. They didn't know why you wouldn't wake up. Issei stroked her hair and he hugged her tighter. He breathed in her scent. Lavender and a hint of the sea. I'm sorry for worrying you, I'm just glad we won. He felt Sona shudder underneath him. She looked into his eyes and her tears streamed down her face. I didn't care about winning, I know my sister would have done something if we lost. Issei froze. What? She shook her head, looking at him. I didn't care about the game, I cared about you. Issei's mind stopped. Every thought he had in his brain was thrown out of the metaphorical window. As everything in his mind screeched to a halt, Sona's voice captured his full attention. When I was on the ground and I saw you fighting Riser, I was so worried. You gave him no chance and yet, I was terrified for you. Then when your mask disappeared and I saw all the blood and how your eyes seem almost lifeless. She choked out a sob. I thought I had lost you. Even through the pain and being unconscious, you fought. You fought with everything you had and more. She looked away and Issei brought his hand to her cheek. He slowly moved her face so she was looking at him. When I heard you scream, all I saw was red. I faintly heard my yells, but I felt every hit he took and the heat of the fire, but I didn't care about any of that. I wanted you to be safe and to me, I didn't care what happened to me in the process. Sona bit her lip, an action that made Issei want to grab her face and kiss her like there was no tomorrow. She stared into his brown eyes and he stared into her violet ones. Issei. Sona. Slowly, hesitantly, they moved closer to each other. Issei could feel her breath on his lips. They stopped just before they connected and they closed their eyes. Issei wasn't sure who moved, her or him, but everything stopped when their lips met. It started off shy, then it slowly but surely became a full-blown kiss. Passions ran high, with Sona running her hands through his hair and his hands caressing her cheeks. They didn't know how long they kissed. For all they knew, the world had stopped and they were the only two people left on the earth. And they loved it. Unfortunately, the need for air became too important and they separated, heaving for air. Sona leaned her head against his and she closed her eyes again. I've never been so sure of something in my life and I wish I had told you earlier. She opened her eyes and stared right into his. I love you, Issei. Issei's heart skipped a beat. Was this all a dream? Did he die? He pinched his leg with one of his hands and he felt the slight irritating feeling of it. Nope, he was awake. His face broke out into a smile and so did hers. He kissed her again and through the kisses, he whispered out. I love you, Sona. Tsubaki silently closed the door to Issei's room. She had decided to pay the recent addition to the peerage a visit and when she opened the door, she had heard Sona's confession. She smiled. It's about time it happened. She felt a twang in her heart and remembered the small conversation Issei and her had in the gym. She remembered how she felt in his arms as she was whisked away and she clutched her chest. She shook her head and quietly walked away with a smile on her face. Look at Issei and Sona. They're holding hands. Does this mean the rumors were true? Oh, they look so cute together. Damn you Haidu. That was the gist of what Sona and Issei heard when they walked to school together. He squeezed her hand and she squeezed in return. Sona smiled and many students gasped. The cold calculated student council president had smiled. It must have been the end of days. Issei kissed her cheek and many of the fangirls had squealed. She turned to him. I'll see you after school. Welcome to officially being part of the student council, Issei. She pecked his lips and walked away. Issei brought a hand to his lips and smiled. He suddenly felt a tingling on the back of his head and he ducked. He saw two bodies fly over his head and he sighed. Mitsuda, Motohama, what the hell are you two doing? This is the second time you've done this in a week. They scrambled up and Mitsuda pointed a finger at Issei. You traitor. You made a pact that we'd all get girlfriends together. Issei facepalmed. I never agreed to that. You guys just said that and left without hearing my answer. The three continued to argue and Sona giggled quietly as she walked away. Asia stared out of her bedroom window quietly. She had been here for a short time and only one person had been nice to her. Asia, are you alright? She turned her head to see Rainer. Asia shyly smiled. Hi, Rainer. Just thinking. Rainer smiled softly and sat next to her. You ready for tonight? You and Fried have to head out for a mission. You nervous? Asia nodded. She was holding her rosary tightly and praying quietly. Rainer had noted that Asia had kept that everywhere she went. That's a beautiful rosary, Asia. Where'd you get it? Asia smiled sadly and teared up slightly. My big brother gave it to me before I was taken away from him. Rainer gasped and engulfed Asia in a tight hug. Asia sobbed quietly, remembering her short time with the brown-haired boy. She was abandoned by everyone. Her family, the church. But he stood by her through it all. Big brother, I miss you. Rainer grabbed Asia's shoulders and wiped away her tears. We'll find him, Asia. I promise. Asia smiled and together they spoke until night fell. Boy, where's the nun? We're headed out. Rainer smiled at Asia and brought her to the front where Fried waited. She spoke. Keep her safe, Fried. If anything happens to her, it's on you. And I'll make sure you pay. She turned to Asia and whispered. If he gives you a hard time, tug on your rosary. I put an alert on it if you do that. Asia smiled and nodded. She ran off after Fried and Rainer watched them turn the corner. She frowned. I have a bad feeling about tonight. Issei's eyes snapped open, him jumping up from the couch he laid upon. He panted. Greg, did you see that too? I did. It seems that our dreams have been repressed memories. But who could have the power to erase the memory of me as well? Issei thought for a few moments before replying. We keep this to ourselves, okay? Or at least most of our memories. He heard a grunt of agreement from Drake before the connection faded away. He heard the door open behind and he turned towards it. He saw who it was and smiled. Hey Sona. She looked up from the set of papers he held and smiled. Oh hey. How did you sleep? She sat next to him and he gave her a quick kiss on the cheek. He almost told her of his dreams but kept quiet. I slept just fine. What time is it by the way? Sona looked down at her watch before replying. It's 8 in the evening, you slept for a while. Issei nodded before he heard Sona's phone ring. He looked at Sona. It's Ria's. What could she need at this hour? She answered, staying silent for a few moments. Huh. Okay, we'll check it out. See you soon. Issei tilted his head, looking into Sona's eyes. What did she need? There's some sort of barrier surrounding the house of one of her clients. Due to the wedding being called off, Ria's and the rest of her peerage are stuck in the underworld with some family business. You and I are going to check it out. Issei nods. Sounds good. Where's the house? Not too far from here. Figured we can just walk there. Issei got up from the couch and held out his hand. Well then Ms. Citri, care to join me for a walk? She smirked before intertwining her fingers with his. You better keep me safe, Mr. Haidu. Issei smiled and her heart skipped a beat. I always will. The walk towards the house was fairly silent with how late it was. Issei and Sona entered the doorway and instantly a chill ran down their spines. Issei tilted his head and Sona fixed her glasses. I sense 2 auras in the building, one magical. Be ready for some resistance. Issei closed his eyes, thinking for a moment. I feel them too, but one seems familiar for some reason. They walked in, ready for a fight. They weren't expecting to see a mutilated body nailed onto a cross. Holy shit. They heard a male laugh and turned their heads towards the couch. A man sat lazily, holding a gun and a light sword. I see you've witnessed my handiwork. Does it get you off? It probably does, seeing as you two are devils. Sona fixed her glasses, keeping her cool. No one in their right mind enjoys this. The man's face cracked into a crazed grin. It's a good thing I'm not sane then. The man bowed. Fried Selizan, exiled exorcist at your service. Sona narrowed her eyes, feeling a barrier surround the house. She knew the source of it was somewhere in the house, feeling the aura of the user somewhere. Issei, be careful. We're not the only ones in the house. There's another person. He nods, feeling the presence. He tilted his head slightly. Greg, you feel that? I feel it too. Why does it seem familiar? Fried then pulled out a saber made of light and a gun, pointing at the pair of devils. They immediately tensed, standing in a fighting position. So 2 on 1, eh? Should be a fun challenge against you two shitty devils. Issei shook his head in disbelief. You murdered this man in cold blood and we're the shitty ones, what the fuck is wrong with you? Sona put her hand on his You lecture me on smart decisions and then you nearly attack in rage. He turned to see a teasing smirk on her face and he smiled back. Do as I say, not as I do, Sona. Boy. Stop flirting and let's fight. Sona pecked his cheek and whispered into his ear. We aren't done here, Issei. After this, you're treating me. Issei blinked at the teasing tone in her voice before smiling. Sona then narrowed her eyes before summoning water from seemingly thin air. The water shifted next to Sona before it shaped into an owl, landing on her shoulder. You want to fight? You've got it. Issei summoned his gauntlet, Fried's eyes widening before his face split into a crazed grin. Now you're talking. A real fight. The two sides stood still, waiting to strike before. Fried, what's going on? Issei turned at the sound of the voice and froze. Asia? Asia's head snapped towards him, shock written on her face. The big brother? In a flash, all of his memories of Asia came flooding back, her voice seeming to trigger all of them. Sona's eyes widened before Asia rushed towards Issei. She hugged him tight, his arms wrapping around her. She cried into his jacket and he brushed her hair softly. It's okay, Asia, I'm here. I'm here now. I never should have let them get away with you. He felt Sona's hand on his shoulder again and he turned to see a curious and worried look on her face. I'll tell you what I remember after. I'm still yours and nothing's changing that. She nodded, reassured, before she tilted her head in confusion. What you remember? Issei was about to reply before a gunshot rang through the house, a bullet made of light grazing his cheek. He spun around so Asia was behind him before looking at Sona. I'll keep him occupied. You get her home safe. Sona opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, Issei jumped forward, blocking another shot that would have hit her. Go. Sona gritted her teeth before teleporting out with Asia. They landed in front of Issei's home and Sona immediately called Tsubaki. Kaichu. Tsubaki, get the rest of the peerage. Issei's fighting a Rouge exorcist alone. Teleport to my location as soon as you can. Hi Kaichu. She turned to Asia, leading her inside. She sat her down on the couch. Asia, we'll get him back. Just stay here till we come back. If anyone tries to get in, run upstairs into Issei's room. Asia nodded, shaking slightly. Sona teleported back to the house before running inside. She could hear Issei shouting and loud bangs coming from the living room. She sprinted inside, finding Issei facing against not only Fried but a squad of exorcists. There were already a couple of bodies laid across the room, their swords lying next to them. A blue light shone behind them and the rest of the peerage emerged. Issei. Issei was panting slightly, a few cuts on his body. He turned and shot a weak grin towards them. Don't worry about me. I'm fine. Fried laughed manically. You're a harder target than I thought. Looks like this is a job for the higher-ups. The light appeared behind the exorcists and Tsubaki narrowed her eyes. Fallen angels. Kaichu, we should get out of here. We shouldn't risk war any further. Sona nodded and Issei moved towards the rest of the peerage, never taking his eyes off of the group. Exorcists moved towards them and Issei brought up his gauntlet, a red beam charging it. Dragon shot. The beam shot forward, disintegrating anything that stood in its path and the exorcists moved out of its way. A few were caught unaware and didn't make it out in time. Issei quickly stepped inside the magic circle, the group teleporting away. They landed in Issei's home, Sona immediately grabbing Issei and dragging him into another room. Sona. What the? She shoved him against a wall, her lips upon his, kissing him for all he was worth. Issei froze before relaxing into the kiss. Sona backed away and slapped him. Issei yelped and noticed the angry look on her face. Never do that again. If you do, I'll kill you before they do. Issei held a hand to his cheek, nodding. Her face softened and hugged him. I just got you, I'm not gonna lose you now. He nodded, kissing the top of her head. You won't. I promise. They walked hand in hand back to the living room, spotting Asia coming from the stairs. She rushed to Issei again and he hugged her tightly. The others tensed at the sight of the girl in a nun uniform before Sona shook her head. She's okay. Don't worry. She turned to Issei and spoke. Issei, it's time to explain. How do you know her? He sighed before taking a seat. Asia sat next to him, holding his hand. Honestly, I don't know the whole story. My memory is all messed up and I don't know which memories are real and which are made up. Sona and the others leaned in slightly. Made up memories. He's telling the truth. The others jumped at the appearance of Drake's voice. It would appear that both Issei and I's memories have been altered in some way. We've recently been having dreams of past events that neither of us remember. Asia's appearance and reaction to Issei confirms that the dreams, at least the dreams of her, have been memories this entire time. Asia smiled at the sound of Drake's voice. Drake. I've missed you. Drake let out a happy hum. Ah, I've missed your presence, Asia. It's probably a good thing to mention that Asia here has an affinity towards dragons. She has a presence that calms me in a way I cannot explain. She is very useful. I would advise bringing her into your peerage Sona. She will be of great use with her sacred gear and her affinity towards me. Sona's eyes immediately locked onto the pair of rings on Asia's hands, her mind racing. Twilight healing. Tsubaki's eyes widened upon hearing Sona. That would be very useful indeed. Sona looked at Asia, pulling out her extra bishop. Asia, would you like to join my peerage? We'll keep you safe from the fallen angels. Asia nodded nervously before speaking. There's someone there who's been taking care of me there. I can call her to come here. Is that okay? Issei and the others nodded and she tugged at the cross at her neck. They noticed a purple glow before. Asia. Are you alright? Issei froze at the sound of the voice behind them and slowly turned his head. Yama. Rainer gasped at his voice and her hands flew to her mouth. Memories flashed in Issei's eyes. Him introducing her to Mitsuda and Motohama, their first date. Her stabbing him. Issei. Sona stood up at the side of Rainer, her eyes tinting red slightly. She lifted her hand, water circling her. So you were the one who tried to kill my beloved Issei. Issei sweat dropped. Talk about possessive. Though it is kinda cute. Issei stood up and blocked Sona. She looked confused before Issei spoke. What are you doing here Yama? Asia stood up next to Issei, her eyes showing confusion. Rainer, how do you know Issei? And what did Sona mean by killing him? Rainer sighed, her wings fluttering slightly. She silently thanked her past self for being dressed when she felt the alert go off. That would have made things more awkward. It's a long story. Asia turned to Issei. Big brother, what did she mean? Rainer's head snapped towards Issei, her eyes wide. You're the big brother she's always talking about. He nodded at the question before explaining the entire situation. This has been a long day. So let me get this straight. You tried to kill me because you were under orders from Kakabiel to kill any sacred gear users you found because you thought it would help strengthen your relationship with Azazel. Rainer nodded, sheepishly scratching the back of her head and fiddling with her cup of tea. Asia was fast asleep in Issei's room and the rest of the peerage besides Sona had gone home. Issei and Rainer sat opposite one another and Sona sat next to Issei. When you say it like that, it makes me feel petty. And I did take care of Asia. Issei let out a small chuckle. Yeah you did, and I will always thank you for that. Issei sobered up after that. I remember the look on your face when you stabbed me. Rainer looked down to the floor, her eyes tearing up. I thought it'd be a simple enough mission. Take you out. But then you just had to surprise me with how nice and caring you were throughout the week, and by the time we were at the fountain, I didn't want to do it. It broke my heart to see the look in your eyes. I was gonna leave the group after the mission was done after I killed you. I was gonna go back to Azazel and the Grigori. She choked out a sob before feeling Issei's hand on her cheek, lifting her face up. He wiped away a tear and she leaned into his touch. I forgive you. She froze in shock. What? Issei sighed, running a hand through his hair. You were under orders and I know you regret it. I've always had a knack for being able to tell if people are lying. And without you doing it, I don't think I would have ever realized how much I love Sona. So in a way. He looked into her eyes and let out a small laugh. Thank you for killing me. Without that, I wouldn't be where I am now. Rainer flew into his arms, hugging him tightly and crying into his chest. He rubbed her back comfortingly and looked at Sona, who stood to the side. He grabbed her hand and gave it a soft squeeze, an unspoken promise. He heard Rainer sniffle before she pulled away. She let out a watery giggle. Your kindness will be the end of you one day, you know that. He smiled before nodding. Rainer held out her hand and spoke. I know it's too late to claim your heart, but can we be friends? Issei's only answer was to grab her hand and shake it softly. Friends it is. Issei gasped, his voice dying in his throat. What the hell? Partner, are you alright? Yeah, just another memory but Sona was there. He looked around, seeing the moonlight filter through the blinds in his room, his mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Sona? But how? It seems that memory took place just before our memory got wiped. But how is Sona here? It appears these events happened recently, but who is powerful enough to make both us and Sona forget our past? And why didn't they erase Asia's memories as well? He heard footsteps race through the hall, and he looked to see his door fly open and a figure jump towards him. Before he could register anything, he had a very emotional Sona kissing him for all he was worth, tears streaming down her face. He held her tight, falling back onto his bed with Sona on top of him. They stayed like this for quite some time, before Sona pulled away and buried her face into his chest. Sona, what's wrong? She shook, her tears staining his shirt. I lost you so long ago. His eyes widened. She knows but how. She looked up and kissed him again, more softly. I had a dream, but when I woke up, I knew it wasn't just that I knew it was a memory. Issei hugged her tight, kissing the top of her hair. Glad to know I wasn't the only one. She looked at him curiously, quickly regaining her composition. She sat up, allowing Issei to sit up properly. He cleared his throat before speaking. I've been having these surges of memories recently, remembering parts of my life I don't remember living. I realized recently that the cause of our memory loss is due to someone powerful enough to grant my wish of starting over. Drake and I have been trying to figure out who is powerful enough to erase a whole part of our lives, but we have no clue so far. Sona summoned her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Well, I would have preferred knowing about all this as soon as possible, she said as she shot him a glare. I understand why you withheld this from everyone. She proceeded to tilt her head and close her eyes, and Issei had to resist the urge to pat her head. So cute. There's only two people that come to mind that are powerful enough to erase memories at that level without completely wiping the person's mind. And we have to keep in mind that they erased the memories of Drake and completely healed me as well. She opened her eyes, and Issei saw the confusion in them. But I have no idea why they would do so much for us. She felt Issei's hand on her cheek, and she leaned into it. And I know who those two are. Might as well know who our supposed saviors are, right? She smiled at that, but her eyes shot down. I highly doubt we'll ever meet them, but if you really want to know. She fixed her glasses and sat up straight, in a position Issei loved to call her teacher mode. Naturally, the only two beings I can think of are the most powerful beings in existence. The first being Great Red, the true Red Dragon God Emperor. With Great Red controlling the power of dreams, he can very well do anything if he really wanted to do it. Issei's eyes widened, trying to fully comprehend the level of power Great Red had. The second is more confusing, if you'd believe that. Issei snapped back to reality at that comment. The only other being I can think of is Office. At the mention of her name, Issei grunted in pain, clutching at his head. He distinctly heard Drake make a similar noise, which worried him immensely. Sona's hands immediately shot out to hold him, only to catch his body as he fell unconscious. Issei. Issei looked up from his desk to see Office standing in the doorway, her usual emotionless look on her face. He made the motion to walk in, and she sat on his bed. He turned to look at her, before speaking up. What is it that you need, Office? Do you need me to make another chocolate run? The godly dragon shook her head before she spoke, staring directly into his eyes. When are you planning to reveal your relationship with the sister of one of the great satans of the underworld? Issei froze and immediately tensed. How the hell did Office know about Sona? You don't need to worry. Only I know of this information. Issei kept his guard up, but Drake spoke for him. Office, Issei had no plans of anyone knowing of his relationship with her. It would be preferred that no one else know of it. Office seemed to be deep in thought before nodding. I agree, Drake. It would prove detrimental to the health of your host. I was just curious as to how and why he chose to fall in love with the enemy. Issei sighed heavily, rubbing his face with his hands before inhaling deeply. I don't have an answer for you, Office. It just happened. I'm certainly not going to spy for you if that's what you want to ask. Issei finished his statement with a glare that sent a chill through Office's spine, and she didn't understand why it affected her like it did. Calm yourself, Issei. I'm not going to ask you to do anything that will break our agreement. Issei glared before relaxing. Office stood up and walked towards him before sitting in his lap. Issei let out a noise of reply, but Office neither noticed nor cared. I wanted to sate a curiosity of mine, and you have delivered. So I have another proposition for you. Issei nodded before she spoke once more. I have no interest in eradicating the supernatural world, and the only thing I want is to be back home. So what I wish to ask of you, Issei, is will you join me in spying on the Cows Brigade and taking back my home? Issei looked at Office, confused. I understand helping you in taking back the dimensional gap, but why spy on the brigade? Office turned and began to walk out the room. She stopped and turned her head, and Issei was shocked to see an uncharacteristic smile on her face. Why, to help your precious mate, of course. She let out a small giggle before leaving Issei's room, leaving him frozen in shock. Sona sat quietly, holding Issei's bigger hand in her smaller ones. She panicked at first, but a quick scan showed nothing was wrong with him. So she waited. She waited quietly, watching him for any sign of his awakening, and let her mind wander. She mumbled quietly to herself. So Issei and I had something before as well. Could it be we were subconsciously drawn to each other due to our past, or did we fall in love with each other all over again? She grew depressed at the thought of having a whole past with Issei and not remembering most of it. A whole part of our lives together erased. She was shaken out of her thoughts when Issei groaned, and she immediately shot forward, cupping his face with her hands. Hey, you're okay. You worried me there. What happened? Issei's eyes fluttered open, holding one of her hands. She grew concerned at the look of confusion on his face. Another memory. Issei took a deep breath before he spoke. I had a past with Office. Hey Issei. Wait up. Issei turned to see both Mitsuda and Motohama running to him. He smiled and slowed his pace. What's up? Haven't heard from you two in a little while. Mitsuda spoke for the two of them. Ah, the usual. Peeking, getting beaten up, watching stuff. But we wanted to ask you something. Issei tilted his head, and behind him, a contingent of fangirls squealed at his unintentional cuteness. Yeah sure, what do you need to know? Well, two things really, Motohama said. One, you seem to have beefed up lately. What's the reason for it? Issei let out a small laugh, and his hand went to the back of his head, scratching it softly. No real reason, really, he said. Just wanted to work out and stuff. Can't really say I was fighting for someone's life, now can't I? Haha. No, I can't imagine so partner. Okay then, Mitsuda piped in. Second question. He leaned in, and he stage whispered the question, loudly enough that the people in the hall could hear. How'd you get Sona Kaichu to date you? Issei deadpanned, his mouth drawn in a straight line. Now why are you asking me this now? As I recall, you two were more interested in beating the crap out of me for breaking our agreement. Issei thought for a moment before raising his voice. An agreement I never even agreed to. The two perverts backed up slightly before setting their faces in a sly smirk. I dunno Issei, we've been hearing some things. Issei crossed his arms before speaking again. Things like what? Oh, I don't know, Mitsuda began. Things like you're holding something above her head in order for her to date you, cause I mean, you are one of the blandest people in this school. Oh, if you only knew what I've done. To be fair partner, we've just started remembering what we've done. Am a drag, let me be mad at them. Oh, I'm not saying don't be mad. These two jealous pricks obviously started some sort of rumor. I'm just saying that you were relatively boring before the whole Rainer incident. Fair point. And just what do you think I'm holding over her? Mitsuda grinned. I think I overheard that you were holding some naughty photos over her head and that she never agreed to them. Trust me, anything he's got, I've got more in return. The trio froze and turned to see Sona walking towards them. I've been here the entire time, so don't bother explaining yourselves. She walked up to Issei and kissed his cheek before whispering into his ear. Play along, she said, a coy smile on her face. Partner, I don't know what you've done to ease her up like this, but I am enjoying this. Issei nodded along, wondering the same thing. Now Sona, whatever happened to our little privacy agreement? She smiled slyly at him, her eyes dancing with hidden amusement. I only made you agree to that, I get to brag. Various voices cried out in surprise and wonder. Whoa, Issei really won the lottery with her. I'm so jealous of her. I wanna see. Damn you Haidu. The two perverts had yet to move, their faces pale and sweat beading on their foreheads. We were joking about the rumors. Sona turned to the two, the coy smile never leaving her face. Who said I was though? She said, before her face set in stone. I don't take kindly to people trying to ruin my and my own's reputations. The entire hall felt the chill in her words. Many noted that only Issei seemed unaffected by it. Issei turned to see both Murayama and Caddis watching angrily, their shinai gripped tightly. Issei turned to Sona and whispered. Say, the kendo duo is right there, why don't we give them a target? Sona smiled, kissing his cheek. Such a smart boy. She looked to the two kendo captains. You two, why don't you decide what to do with these two? The smile on either of their faces sent a shiver down Issei's spine. Glad I'm not them. Sona turned to Issei and threaded her fingers with his. Hey, we've got a problem, she spoke. Seems that our little fallen team is planning on something sinister. The sun had long set when the blue teleportation circle had shone in front of the dilapidated church. Issei stood next to Sona and Tsubaki, taking the front. With his enhanced hearing, he heard chanting coming from within, and he turned to his king and queen. Seems like they're prepping some sort of ritual, he said quietly. Looks like they have someone, but who? Sona fixed her glasses, turning to her peerage. Be prepared for anything, we don't know how many exiled exorcists they have for support. Looking everyone in the eyes, she spoke again. I do not want to lose anyone tonight. Ira spoke up, her voice carrying a sense of pride and confidence. If Issei can take down the beepy bird brain all on his own, we can handle a few fallen. Issei blushed at the unexpected praise and sent the rook a shy grin. He stepped forward, opening the old wooden doors, and they all stepped inside. The inside was as dilapidated as the outside had set it up to be. Part of the roof had collapsed, and moonlight filtered through like a white waterfall. Various pews were scattered across the church, dust adorning most like a thick blanket. Issei noticed that only the two largest pews nearest to the altar were clear of dust, as if they were often used. There's a hidden entrance near the altar, the fallen must have placed a camouflage spell on it. Tsubaki fixed her glasses before speaking again. They either terrible at hiding magic or they weren't expecting anyone to find them. Stay on guard, Sona spoke. They could be setting up a trap. Issei lead the way forward. He noted how footprints were surrounded by dust on the floor and they suddenly disappeared right before the altar. It's not locked at all, Issei said after inspecting the magic room that was visible. It's almost as if they were in a room. Before he could finish his sentence, a wave of holy magic tore through the hidden door, blasting it wide open. The faint chanting they heard earlier had suddenly rose to a loud, almost frantic, screaming. But there was one scream that Issei heard that made his heart freeze. One that seemed familiar. He shuddered heavily, his brain flowing with repressed memories, one overriding them all. Ice. Come on, let's play. The 10-year-old Issei looked up, his eyes catching those of his only friend. Hang on, Rin. I'm just looking for my sword. His friend pouted before pulling a pair of cardboard swords from behind her back. Ice, I thought I told you not to call me Rin anymore. It's not my fault you assumed I was a guy. Issei blushed at her words. It was true, but to no fault of his own. Irina had been very tomboyish until recently and she still hadn't let him live it down. Irina, Issei corrected himself at her glare. Can you take out your what was it that your dad called it? My sacred gear, right? She answered him. At his nod, she smiled brightly and nodded quickly. A flash of light blinded Issei momentarily before his vision cleared. In Irina's hands was snow-white rapier with a few different colored cylinders at its hilt. It never gets old seeing it, Issei muttered quietly. He looked nervously at her before speaking quietly. Can I hold it? Irina smiled softly before holding out the blade. Anything for you, partner. Irina. Issei shouted out. With a speed not even Tomo could match, Issei shot down the spiral stairs into the hidden chamber. The rest of the peerage blinked before rushing down with him, seeing him stopped at the entrance of a large chamber. They all gasped at the sight within. Rows upon rows of exiled exorcists kneeled before an altar, Danashik stood behind it and upon the altar was a bloodied and battered figure, one that Issei obviously recognized. In Danashik's hands was a sword of some sort and at the sight of it, the devil shivered. Is that Tsubaki stuttered out before Sona confirmed it. That's Murtnester, the holy sword and sacred gear of the Schnee bloodline. Sona's eyes were wide, both in disbelief and in awe. Issei, how do you know her? Issei's eyes were glaring at Danashik, his hair beginning to slightly hover. A crimson-red aura began to surround him and Sona noted a ring of crimson flames surrounding Issei. She felt the heat come from them, a heat stronger than that of the Phoenix family. The same flames that consumed him within the raiding game. My first friend and my partner in all but blood. Issei began to unravel at his own words and the exorcists and fallen angels began to notice his presence. Before any of them could process it, Issei rushed forward, the crowd of exorcists running to meet him, light swords out. But the skill and poise few had seen, Issei let his flames consume his hands, dodging and weaving through the crowd. Any exorcist he touched went alight, with Sona and her peerage watching in shock and terror. Throughout it all, Issei never wavered, his fists mere blurs. Danashik flew down to join the fight, a crazed smile on his face. He gripped Murtnester tightly and as the few remaining exorcists backed off, he sliced at Issei. As the rest of the peerage dealt with the remaining exorcists, Sona ran towards the altar, checking over the figure, who she assumed was Irina. Her clothes were in tatters and cuts and bruises littered her body. She mumbled incoherently, the only thing Sona could make out was Issei's name. She must have detected his aura. So, she's Issei's partner from the brigade. Why won't you die, you damn devil? Sona turned to see Issei and Danashik still in combat, Danashik enraged. Backing off from Issei, he pointed the blade towards Issei and aimed. Sona froze in horror at this, recognizing the move immediately. He's going to fire one of the light cylinders. She watched as the cylinders clicked into place and saw the yellow-tinted one begin to glow. Bang. A needle point of lightning shot from the rapier, blasting towards Issei. He stood stock still, and Sona felt the holy aura reach a fever pitch from the bullet of lightning. Even from across the huge hall, she felt the electrical shocks emanating from it. Issei, move. She cried out in fear, knowing she and the rest of the peerage who were scattered around the hall would not make it in time to get him out of the way. She watched with rapt attention and horror as it blasted towards him. Crash. Her eyes were blinded by a crimson-red flash, and for a moment she had the terrifying idea that she was blinded by his blood. But when it cleared, she gasped. Issei still stood, but with a few key differences. His aura was so great, it began to form cracks within the floor surrounding him, and his jacket seemed to flare around in an unseen breeze. But the biggest thing was the weapon he now held in his hands. A mechanical black and red scythe was within his hands, and he gripped it tightly. From her point of view, Tsubaki's eyes widened considerably, and she almost collapsed at the power she felt coming from Issei. That's the crescent rose. The rose is family weapon, but does that mean? Danashik Issei spoke, but at the same time, it was not fully his own voice that came from his mouth. It seemed to exude pure power, and all who heard it shivered. Danashik paled at the sight of the demonic weapon clicking. He knew what would come from the barrel. You have made your final mistake. Or. At his words, the weapon began to charge up and a blood-red light began to come from within. The room began to rumble and debris fell from the roof. Cracks began to appear on the various pillars within the room. Tsubaki made her move at this, pushing up her glasses as she shouted to Sona. Haichu. Use everything you can to keep him there. We have to end this now before he ends up collapsing the building around us. Sona nodded and began to surround Danashik in a cage of water. Tsubaki's own magic came to reinforce the cage as Danashik began to panic and slice at what seemed to be solid bars of water. You cannot defeat me. I will become the strongest of all the fallen. I will not fail cock. Too late. Too on. A huge red laser blasted out of the side then engulfed the cage in its entirety. Not a single trace of Danashik was left behind. As the dust began to settle, Sona saw Murtnister stabbed within the ground, seeming untouched. She recalled the legend of the two weapons and one line fluttered into her mind. Neither weapon shall scar the other, for the weapon's creators designed the two sibling weapons with a purpose unknown. Issei quietly stepped towards it, crescent rose hoisted over his shoulder. His footsteps echoed through the large hall, and the peerage watched as he placed his hand upon Murtnister's hilt. A blast of white light shone through the hall, and Issei stood at the center, his coat flying violently from the sudden gust of wind coming from the sword itself. Dust began to kick up, and Sona noticed how Irina's body began to pulse with the same white light. He pulled it from the ground and began to walk over to Sona and Irina. He looked at her unconscious body and placed the rapier softly onto her body. He held out Crescent Rose and uttered a command. Transfer. The scythe flashed red, and Sona watched as the bruises and cuts that decorated Irina disappeared. She heard Issei grunt slightly and looked over to see the same cuts and bruises begin to form all over his body. He collapsed onto a knee, using Crescent Rose as a crutch. Sona quickly put his arm over her shoulder carefully, as to not harm her lover. Issei, just what else are you hiding? Issei coughed and laughed slightly. He raised his head to look into Sona's eyes and muttered out his answer. I don't know myself, Sona. Irina laid comfortably on Issei's bed, her chest rising and falling with each breath. Issei and Sona sat quietly in the living room, the rest of the peerage scattered around the house. Sona held Issei's hand tightly, her hand coated with a blue aura. Warm coats of water slid across Issei's body, healing his various injuries. Sona, have you been getting these memory lapses as well? Issei questioned Sona desperately, hoping to find out that he was not alone in the sudden onslaught of repressed memories coming to the forefront of his mind. When she shook her head, he deflated slightly, leaning back against a couch, and he placed his head on her shoulder. I'm experiencing flashes, images, but no full-blown memories like you. She sighed sadly, before kissing Issei on the head. Don't worry, love, we'll figure this out. Issei could only nod slowly, keeping his eyes closed. Drake stayed silent, sensing his partner's inner struggle. We'll figure this out, Issei. For the sake of us all. Erg. Irina stretched her arms, one going over her eyes to block the bright sunlight from hitting her eyes. She grumbled underneath her breath, turning over on the soft bed, intending to get some more sleep. Then her brain kicked into gear. She shot up, Murtnister in her hand, pointed towards the only figure she could sense within the room. Issei smiled softly, his hands up, showing he meant no harm. Irina didn't budge. Irina, it's okay, he spoke softly. Her eyes frantically scanned the room. His room. She didn't know what to believe, and he knew that. Trying to figure out a way to calm her down, he scanned his memories, searching for anything that could help. Or calcins that should crack through. Slowly, he stood up from where he sat. His hand still up, he began to move towards her. She held the tip of the holy rapier at his throat, and he stopped. He reached out a hand, tweaking her nose, their all-clear signal. Her eyes began to tear up, but she was still coiled like a snake ready to strike. I'm alright, Snow, I'm real. At his words, Murtnister dropped to the ground, and she shot into his awaiting arms. She sobbed loudly, not caring to maintain the Ice Queen persona she had built up over the years. Crimson is Issei. She squeaked out. She buried her head into his chest, and his arms wrapped around her tighter. I'm okay and I'm here. The door to Issei's room squeaked open, and he felt the familiar aura of Sona walk in. She sat quietly at his office chair, waiting for Irina to calm down. When she finally began to calm herself, she pulled back and reached out to cup Issei's cheek. It's really you, she murmured out. After what happened, all we found were the bodies. I thought they killed you. Issei laid his hand over hers, his eyes never leaving hers. They might as well have, he started, but I'm here now. He sat Irina down on his bed and reached down to pick up Murtnister. He held it out handle first, and Irina accepted it before sheathing it. He sat down himself, before looking at both Sona and her. Now, let's talk. Sona nodded at that, before clearing her throat. After the incident, both Issei's and my memories were wiped by someone immensely powerful. She looked at Irina. That'll explain why Issei never came looking for you after it all went down. Irina nodded at that, and then it was Issei's turn to speak. As of recently, a lot of my old memories have begun to surface once more, and while I know for sure that you're my partner and that you and I were spying for office, I can't remember much of the brigade. He sighed before continuing. As I am now a reincarnated devil, we need as much information we can gather as to who is a part of it and what the brigade's goal is. Irina leaned forward, slipping back into her persona before beginning to explain. Before you were caught, you and I mostly went on hit-and-run assassination missions. We were to find and track down various targets and kill them. They didn't care how we did it, they just wanted us to get the job done. Sona wrote down everything she said down and motioned Irina to continue. The brigade was formed to cause as much chaos as we could within the Christian pantheon, whether that be taking down high-ranking church officials or sabotaging fallen research centers. Issei looked at Sona, mentally asking her if this was enough information. Before she could reply, however, Irina spoke. There's been 2 developments since you left though. Both Sona and Issei looked at her. The old Satan faction has been in contact with us as of late, looking to overthrow the current Great Satans. Sona leaned back in her chair, shocked at the development. They would dare reignite the civil war, she barked out angrily. Memories of stories told and family lost filtered through her head. Her mother still suffered from injuries to this day. Irina only nodded, knowing if she said more, she would most likely enrage Sona to the point of no return. Issei put them back on track, while placing a hand on Sona's leg to help calm her down. The second development is that a splinter cell has begun to emerge within the brigade. I myself am a part of it. Issei's eyes hardened at this, a voice filtering through his brain. One day, we leave the brigade behind and fight for our cause, not theirs. We call ourselves the hero faction, and we're led by. Issei growled out a name, interrupting her. Kuoh. Issei, how long have we known each other? Issei shrugged his shoulders, looking towards his friend and rival. Ever since No and I joined a few years ago, why? Kuoh looked off into the distance. The pair sat quietly on the edge of the roof of their current headquarters. I hate this group, you know that right? Issei nodded before letting out a chuckle. I'm pretty sure everyone knows that except the higher-ups. Kuoh let out a laugh of his own before turning towards Issei. There's a reason why I've been pushing up the ranks a lot lately. Issei rose an eyebrow at this, motioning for him to continue. A lot of us fight for a cause we don't agree with, right? At Issei's nod, he continued, passion seeping into his voice. That's why I'm trying to become a head, so we can splinter off without much complaining from the higher-ups. Ah, I see. Issei smiled at his friend, showing his support. Kuoh leaned back onto the tilted roof, his hands underneath his head. One day, we leave the brigade behind and fight for our cause, not theirs. Hear hear. To Kuoh. Our glorious leader. Laughter emerged from the rooftop, filling the empty night sky. Issei. His eyes focused onto Irina and Sona's worried faces, and he smiled softly at the two. Sorry, just another memory, he let out a sigh. Kuoh was not only my friend, but he's the voice I hear whenever I'm running from them. He was the one leading all the attacks on me. Irina stood up in a flash, her eyes almost alight with rage. He dared to ask me to join after he led the attempts on your life. Issei stood up and placed his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to look into his eyes. He saw all the emotions running through her. Pain, anger, sorrow and guilt. Snow, you need to calm down. Murdernister's aura is spiking, and you're in a house full of devils. Sona watched quietly from the sidelines, her own rage dampened by another thought in her head. Looks like her feelings stem deeper than just a normal partnership. Irina's breaths were ragged, the only thought in her head was how disgusted she felt that she worked for the man who tried to kill her Issei. Wait, her Issei? Where had that come from? Before she could mull over this some more, Sona stood up and placed a hand on Issei's shoulder. Would you mind terribly if I try speaking to her? She asked. Issei tilted his head, and his unspoken question was not lost upon Sona. I think I have an idea as to how to get her mind off this, but you're going to have to leave for a little while. Issei was hesitant, and Sona sensed this. She let out a little huff of laughter and sent him a soft smile. I won't bite, I promise. She kissed his cheek and turned him towards the door to his room, pushing him slightly. Now go on. We won't take long. Issei let out a laugh of his own and left the pair behind. Sona turned to Irina and saw her fidget under her gaze. She had sat down at his bed, her hands toying with the hem of her coat. I think it's time to discuss the man who has a hold on both of our hearts, don't you think? Irina's head snapped to her legs, her eyes wide. I don't know what your tal. Sona cut her off before she could stutter out an excuse. Listen, if you think I'm going to be upset, I'm not. She lifted her glasses off her face and began to wipe them clean. I may be the student council president, but even I am not above lording the fact that have a hold in the heart of the greatest man I've ever met. She gently placed them back on the tip of her nose and smiled at Irina. I know you care for him more than a partner, the way you reacted to the news of Kuoh and the way you held him when you first awoke broadcast that well enough. Irina blushed at that and she nodded her confirmation. It's no fair, she began. He's so perfect in so many ways and he hasn't changed despite what he's experienced. She looked into Sona's eyes and she could clearly see how much Irina cared for her fiancé. How could I not fall in love with him? They sat in silence for quite some time, each lost in their own menagerie of thoughts, before Sona stood from her seat. She watched as Irina looked up nervously to her, almost as if she was awaiting the final blow from her executioner. Depending on what I say, I could very well be the executioner. Sona let out a soft sigh before turning towards the door. She stopped right at the foot of it and turned her head slightly to face Irina. A small smile was on her face. What you do is up to you, just know two things. Irina seemed to perk up at her words and Sona could tell that she hung on her every word. 1. I don't mind one bit. Irina almost set out a sob of relief at her words before she composed herself. And what of the second? Sona fully turned to Irina and at this very moment Irina remembered she was not dealing with a high school girl or a low-ranking servant but a devil heiress. Sona's smile was as threatening as was gloating. I take priority over him. Sona then fixed her glasses and the glare from the sunlight made it impossible to see her eyes. Irina knew what she would see within them would shake her to the core, but Sona decided she was not exactly done. After all, there's a reason why the devil king that is the embodiment of lust comes from my family. Irina could only gulp and blush furiously at that connotation. When Sona left the room, Irina could only think of one thing. I'm glad Crimson is the one who has to deal with her when she's in the mood. Oh, if she only knew how wrong she would be. Issei wisely did not question why the Citri heiress was smiling so widely when she came from her conversation with Irina, silently stating that he would not ask questions he did not want the answers to. As it was the weekend, the couple shared a quiet but comforting lunch together, which was only interrupted by the sight of Irina with a rucksack over her shoulder. Issei stood up at this and looked at Irina with questioning eyes. You're leaving already? But you've just recovered. Irina sighed sadly before smiling at him. I've been missing from the group for quite some time now, any longer and they'll start actively searching for me. She looked into his eyes. Which means they could find you again. Issei looked towards the floor for the kitchen, sadly acknowledging that fact of information. Before he could look back up, however, he found himself in Irina's embrace. It's alright, Crimson, I'll be okay. She pulled back and smirked, which Issei remembered was her signature look. I'll be sure to keep in contact and I'll send as much info as I can. Issei placed a hand on her cheek and spoke softly. Just don't risk too much, okay? Irina reached up and held his hand, leaning into it for comfort. She spoke her next line with genuine trust. Don't worry if I get in trouble, I know you'll be there to pull me out of the fire. And don't you dare forget that. With that final line, she stood a little straighter and kissed his cheek, leaving him stunned for a moment. He watched as she vanished from sight, almost like she had teleported instantaneously. She's as fast as Kiba and she's only human impressive. Issei turned to Sona and saw her smile. Don't worry about that kiss, I'm fine with it, on one condition. And what would that be, Mr. Citri? At his words, she released a smile so full of lust and longing, one that even Aika would struggle to compete with. Outdo it in every way. As you wish, mistress. And he proceeded to do just that. And so how was this story? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this story with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.